The sword does not kill the warrior. The mind does. This was the first truth Renjiro learned, not from his master's lips, but from the dirt floor of a dojo, where he had been thrown for the 7th time in a single afternoon, bleeding from his lip, staring up at the rafters with something uglier than defeat festering inside his chest. He was 19 years old and already consumed by a fire he could not name, one that had been burning since childhood, fed by every slight, every dismissal, every moment the world had refused to bend to his will. The men who find themselves on this path, the ones who feel that fire most intensely, often mistake it for ambition, for drive, for the warrior spirit that separates the extraordinary from the ordinary. They are wrong. What burns inside them is something far more dangerous and far more familiar. It is the demon that wears the face of strength while quietly dismantling everything worth building. If you have ever lost something precious to your own rage, if you have ever watched your hands shake with an anger you could not explain, then what follows is not merely a story from ancient Japan. It is a mirror, and the man staring back at you from the other side of the glass is waiting to be transformed. Those who walk this road and choose to keep walking it do not do so alone. The wisdom gathered here at Ancient Wisdom Tea exists precisely for them. Renjiro had come to the mountain province of Shinano at the insistence of his dying uncle, a retired soldier with ruined knees and clear eyes who had seen the boy's rage for what it was long before the boy himself could. "You will destroy everything you touch," the old man had whispered from his futon, not cruelly, but with the particular tenderness of someone delivering a diagnosis rather than an insult. "Go to Hanzo. Tell him I sent you. Tell him nothing else." And so Renjiro had walked 3 days through pine forest and frozen river crossings, arriving at the dojo of Hanzo Kuroyama with blistered feet, an empty stomach, and the quiet conviction that he was about to become something extraordinary. He was right about the becoming. He was catastrophically wrong about what it would cost. Hanzo Kuroyama was not what Renjiro had expected. He had imagined something from the old stories, a towering figure, a voice like thunder, a man whose very presence would announce mastery the way lightning announces the storm. Instead, he found a compact, unhurried man in his late 50s sitting in the courtyard, repairing a sandal, with the focused attention most warriors reserved for battle. He did not look up when Renjiro arrived. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was quiet and completely without performance. "Why are you angry right now?" he asked. Renjiro blinked. "I'm not angry." "Your jaw," Hanzo said, still not looking up from the sandal, "has been clenched since you walked through the gate. Your breathing is shallow. You've looked at the training weapons on the wall rack 3 times in the last minute. You're angry that I haven't acknowledged you properly. You think you deserve a more formal greeting." He set the sandal down and finally looked up, and his eyes were the color of deep water, calm in the way that only very deep things are calm. "You've been angry for so long you've stopped noticing it. It feels like your natural state. It isn't." That was the beginning. The weeks that followed were not what Renjiro had imagined when he pictured warrior training. He had envisioned sparring, techniques, the methodical perfection of form that transformed ordinary men into something dangerous. There was some of that. But Hanzo's true curriculum was something else, entirely. Something Renjiro had no framework for, and therefore initially dismissed as the eccentricity of an old man who had perhaps spent too many years alone on the mountain. Every morning before training, before food, before anything, Hanzo would sit across from Renjiro in the cold pre-dawn courtyard and ask him a single question. Not a question about sword work or strategy or the mechanics of combat. A question about himself. When was the first time you felt genuinely powerless? What is the thing you most fear other men seeing in you? Describe the moment you are proudest of. Now tell me the real reason you're proud of it. Renjiro hated these sessions with a thoroughness that surprised even him. He was a physical creature, accustomed to measuring himself through action, through the clean language of exertion and result. Sitting still and excavating his own interior felt like a humiliation. More than that, it felt useless. He wanted to be forged. This felt like being asked to describe the fire. He said as much to Hanzo one morning, after a question about his father had pushed him somewhere he didn't want to go, and he'd stood up abruptly, pulse hammering, pretending it was impatience rather than panic. "You want to be dangerous," Hanzo said, watching him pace. "You think that's about skill, isn't it?" "A sharp blade in a trembling hand," Hanzo said, "cuts only the hand that holds it." He gestured for Renjiro to sit back down. "Tell me about your father." The truth that emerged over those sessions, slowly, reluctantly, like something pried from a locked chest, was not flattering. Renjiro had grown up in the long shadow of a man who expressed affection exclusively through critique, who measured worth in performance, and who had built in his son an architecture of self-worth so brittle that any knock against it produced not sadness, but fury. Renjiro had learned as a boy that anger was the only response to inadequacy that didn't feel like collapse. Rage felt like strength. It felt like armor. It felt, in the moment of its rising, like the most honest thing about him. What it actually was, Hanzo told him, with neither cruelty nor ceremony, was a child's solution being applied to an adult's life. "The boy needed it," Hanzo said. "You were not wrong to survive that way, but the boy became you, and you made him your lord, and now he commands everything you do." He paused. "How old are you?" 19. "He is not. He is perhaps 6. And a 6-year-old lord," Hanzo said, with something that was almost amusement, "is a dangerous thing for a province." This was the first thing that cracked something open in Renjiro. Not the philosophical arguments, not the stoic maxims Hanzo occasionally quoted from teachers whose names Renjiro didn't recognize, but the specific and somewhat brutal image of himself as a grown warrior being governed by a terrified child. He sat with that image for days. He didn't like it. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The physical training, when Hanzo deemed Renjiro ready for it, was unlike anything he had experienced before. Not because it was harder, though it was harder than anything he had attempted, but because of the nature of what was being trained. Hanzo was not training his body. He was training his reactions. The method was simple and terrible. Hanzo would create conditions designed to provoke anger and then observe, with the detached interest of a man studying weather, exactly what Renjiro did. He would set Renjiro an impossible task and give him insufficient time to complete it, and watch what happened when failure was inevitable. He would have other students, older, more advanced, speak to Renjiro with casual dismissal during training, question his technique, ignore his questions, treat him as fundamentally unworthy of serious attention. He would wake Renjiro in the middle of the night for a full sparring session, and then, when Renjiro had emptied himself completely, announce that the session had actually been a test of something else, and that Renjiro had missed the point entirely. Every time the anger rose, and it rose constantly, reliably, with a consistency that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so limiting. Hanzo would stop everything and say simply, "Notice that." Not suppress it, not apologize for it, not pretend it wasn't there. Notice it. Most men, Hanzo told him, during one of these pauses, while Renjiro stood in the middle of the training ground, breathing with deliberate slowness, hands trembling slightly from the effort of not responding to an insult that had been specifically crafted to find his most sensitive place, spend their entire lives having emotional reactions that they then confuse with reality. The anger tells them the world is unjust, and they believe the anger is perceiving something true. But the anger perceives nothing. It is a fire. It does not see. It burns. Renjiro exhaled. What am I supposed to do with it, if not feel it? You are feeling it. That's not the problem. Hanzo walked toward him slowly. The problem is that you believe it. You feel the anger, and then you build a whole story around it. About what was done to you, about what it means, about what must happen next. The story is the trap. The feeling is just a feeling. It will pass in moments if you don't feed it a story. He stopped a few feet from Renjiro and looked at him with the focus that Renjiro had come to understand was his version of intensity. Miyamoto Musashi won 60 duels against men who were, by any objective measure, his physical equal. Many of them were faster. Some were stronger. What they were not, what no opponent he ever faced managed to be, was calmer. He understood that the man who attacks from anger has already told you his entire plan. He is predictable because he is reactive. He is readable because he is driven. But the man who has killed his own anger, who stands across from you with nothing you can provoke, with no strings you can pull, with no fire you can fan, that man is genuinely terrifying, because you cannot anticipate stillness. You cannot exploit peace. Renjiro thought about this for a long time afterward. Not during the training session. There was never time for thinking during the sessions. But later, lying on his sleeping mat in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, while something in his chest did the slow work of reorganizing itself. He had always assumed, without examining the assumption, that his anger was his power, that the heat of it was what had driven him to train, to push, to keep walking when the road was difficult. He'd worn it like a hidden weapon, something the world couldn't see but that he carried everywhere, available when needed. The possibility that it was not a weapon but a cage was something his mind moved around carefully, the way a man moves around a fire in a small room. But he had begun in those weeks at the dojo to catch himself in the moment before the anger. There was always a moment before, a breath-sized gap between the thing that happened and the story he told himself about the thing. And in that gap, which he would never have noticed if Hanzo hadn't made him stand still long enough to see it, was something unexpected. A choice. Not a large choice. Not something heroic or particularly noble. Just a small and quiet option that had always existed and that he had never seen because the anger was too loud. The choice was, not this time. It did not feel powerful. That was the strangest thing. He had imagined, when he first started to understand what Hanzo was teaching, that mastering anger would feel like something triumphant, like a sword forged, like a fire controlled. It felt like nothing so much as setting something down, a weight he hadn't known he was carrying until the moment he put it on the ground and felt the strange lightness of his own arms. 6 weeks into his training, a merchant's son arrived at the dojo, a young man from a wealthy family who had clearly never in his life been told he was anything less than exceptional. and who made this fact quietly apparent in every interaction. He was technically talented, Renjiro had to admit this, and he had the particular cruelty of the naturally gifted, that casual condescension toward effort that hasn't produced elegance, that faint smile at the struggling. He chose Renjiro as his particular target, perhaps because Renjiro's intensity was visible, a kind of invitation for someone who enjoyed finding the pins in things. He made small comments about Renjiro's form, about his background, about the nature of men who came to mountain dojos seeking what they should have been born with, about the sad determination of the fundamentally limited. The old Renjiro would have been unable to breathe through it. The rage would have risen before the second sentence was finished, hot and immediate, turning everything afterward into damage limitation rather than response. His hands would have made decisions before his mind could arrive. Instead, he found the gap. He stood in the training ground during a shared session and let the merchant's son's words wash over him like water over stone, not suppressing anything, not pretending. He felt the anger try to rise, acknowledged it the way Hanzo had taught him, as a sensation with no particular authority over his actions, and then simply did not follow it. He breathed. He returned his attention to his own technique. He found something that was not quite peace, but was adjacent to it. A clarity, a stillness that, once he located it, felt more solid than rage had ever felt. The merchant's son escalated. When small provocations produced nothing, he grew louder. The quality of his comments sharpened. He made the kind of remarks designed to draw blood, the specific remarks that required inside knowledge of a person's vulnerabilities. And Renjiro understood, watching him, that what he was witnessing was not confidence. It was desperation. A man who expects reaction and is denied it does not become more powerful. He becomes revealed. What was visible now, clearly and without malice, was the smallness underneath the performance, the need, the terror of being unremarkable. Renjiro felt something he had not expected. Compassion. Not warmth exactly. More like recognition. He knew what it felt like to be driven by that particular engine. After the session, Hanzo found him in the courtyard. "I watched," the old man said simply. "I know." "What did you feel?" Renjiro considered. "The anger came. I didn't follow it. Then I saw him clearly. Then I felt sorry for him." Hanzo was quiet for a moment. "That sequence," he said finally, "is the whole teaching. Most men never get past the first feeling. A few get to the second. Very few reach the third." He looked at Renjiro with something that might have been approval, but was too restrained to be called that. "You are beginning." But beginning was not the same as arrived, and Hanzo was careful to make this distinction with the particular precision of a man who had seen many students confuse a milestone with a destination. The real test came from a direction Renjiro hadn't anticipated, because real tests rarely announce themselves. 7 months into his training, word came from his home village through a traveling merchant who recognized him. His younger brother Sora, 17 years old, had been involved in a confrontation with a group of men attached to a local lord's household. The details were unclear in the telling. The merchant was nervous, apologetic, clearly uncomfortable with the burden of the message. But the essential facts were not. Sora had said something that was taken as an insult, and the men had responded with the kind of violence that people attached to power often feel entitled to, and Sora was badly injured. Whether he would recover was uncertain. Renjiro stood in the inn's common room and felt the floor shift. He knew what the anger was doing. He could observe it with the clarity that months of training had given him. could see it exactly as it rose. Volcanic, enormous, completely legitimate in its origin, and completely lethal in its potential consequences. He felt it in his chest like something breaking open. He felt it in his hands. He felt it the way he had always felt it. Like a call, like a direction, like the only possible response to an intolerable reality. He went directly to Hanzo. The old man listened without interrupting. When Renjiro finished, the silence stretched between them for what felt like a very long time. "You want to go there?" Hanzo said. Not a question. Yes. "And do what?" Renjiro had thought about this on the walk to find Hanzo, had tried to see it clearly, had applied everything he'd learned to this exact moment, and had arrived at something surprising. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's why I'm here first." Hanzo looked at him with those quiet, deep water eyes. "That," he said, "is the first genuinely intelligent thing you have said since you arrived." They sat together for a long time in the training room, while the afternoon light moved across the floor. Hanzo did not give instructions. He asked questions. Not the sharp, excavating questions of the early weeks, but slower ones. Questions designed not to uncover, but to allow Renjiro to hear himself think. What do you want the outcome to be? What outcome is actually possible? What would your brother ask of you if he could? What would you do if the anger were removed entirely? What would the decision be then? And the hardest one, delivered without particular emphasis, as if it were no different from the others. What does the boy in you want? And what does the man in you know? Renjiro sat with that last question until the light had moved entirely across the floor and the room was cooling toward evening. The boy wanted blood. He wanted the particular violent symmetry of an eye for an eye, that ancient and deeply satisfying math. He wanted to stand over broken men and know that the account was settled. He wanted to feel powerful in a situation that had made him feel powerless. The man knew something else. The man knew that going to that lord's household, burning with rage, would very likely produce a dead brother and a dead Renjiro, since men attached to power tend to have more of it than isolated travelers, regardless of sword skill. The man knew that Sora's recovery was more urgent than Sora's revenge. The man knew that acting from rage would be giving those men, who had acted without thought or conscience, the additional gift of Renjiro's transformation, the undoing of everything he had built, the reduction of a growing man back into a reactive boy. The man knew that the hardest thing was not the violence he might commit. The hardest thing was choosing not to be ruled. He went home, not to fight, to be with his brother during a recovery that turned out, mercifully, to be complete. He stayed for 3 weeks, sleeping on the floor of Sora's room, being simply present in the way that presence sometimes asks more of a person than action does. On the last evening before he returned to Hanzo's dojo, his brother, still moving carefully but alert and himself again, looked at him across a small fire. "You're different," Sora said. "Yes." "What happened to you up there?" Renjiro thought about this for a while. Outside, the night was doing its slow, ancient work. Somewhere in the forest, an owl sent its question into the dark. "I met the part of me that was running everything," he said finally, "and I made it step down." He returned to the mountain. Hanzo met him in the courtyard, read something in his face, and nodded once without speaking. That nod contained more than most conversations. They resumed training the next morning before dawn, as if nothing had interrupted them. But both men knew that something fundamental had concluded and something else had begun. The years that followed changed Renjiro in ways he could not have predicted and would not have chosen if he had been shown them in advance. He became, through the long accumulation of practice and failure and return to practice, the thing Hanzo had been pointing toward from the beginning. Not a man without anger, he was clear on this distinction and would correct anyone who misunderstood. But a man who had broken anger's authority over him. The feeling came, sometimes powerfully, sometimes in the small domestic ways that are harder in many respects than the dramatic ones. But it arrived now the way weather arrives, observed, experienced, not obeyed. He learned what Hanzo had always been teaching and what had taken him so long to understand. Not because it was complex, but because understanding it required living it. Required being wrong repeatedly. Required sitting in the gap between stimulus and response long enough that the gap became familiar, became home. The teaching was this: the fire that a man cannot control will burn down what he loves most. Not his enemies. His enemies often escape. The fire burns the things nearest to him, the relationships he most values, the future he is trying to build, the version of himself he respects when he is alone and honest. Anger feels like power because power is what it is mimicking. But real power, the power of a man who cannot be moved, who cannot be manipulated, who cannot be baited or broken or redirected by someone who has simply found his strings. Real power is something much quieter and much more difficult and much more lasting. Musashi understood this. Every warrior who has ever become genuinely formidable has understood some version of this. The blade is not what makes a man dangerous. What makes a man dangerous is the stillness behind the blade, the calm that sees clearly while everyone else is clouded, the patience that waits for the opening that anger would have missed because anger was busy being angry. Renjiro taught this for 40 years. He did not advertise the teaching in terms of anger because ambitious young men tend to be suspicious of what sounds like softness. He framed it instead as what it actually was: competitive advantage. The man who cannot be provoked cannot be defeated by provocation. The man who is not ruled by his own reactions is more capable in every situation, in negotiation, in conflict, in the long, difficult project of building something that lasts. The man who has killed the tyranny of his own rage has access to a quality of thinking that is simply unavailable to men still governed by the child within them who needed the rage to survive. He was nearly 60 when he sat one evening with the last student of that particular generation, a young man from a merchant family who had come to the dojo with expensive equipment and the subtle aggression of someone who had always been told he was exceptional and had begun to suspect it might not be true. Renjiro saw in him, with the clarity that decades of attention to human interiors had given him, the same architecture he had carried at 19, the same fire, the same brittleness dressed as pride. He did not begin with techniques. He began with the question Hanzo had asked him 40 years before, on the first morning in a cold courtyard while repairing a sandal. "Why are you angry right now?" The young man blinked, looked around as if checking whether the question was meant for someone else. "I'm not angry." And there it was, the beginning. Renjiro looked at him with eyes that had been watching this particular moment long enough to know everything it contained. The defensiveness, the confusion, the faint shame, the buried recognition, the small, terrified boy behind the composed young man's face, who was going to need to be met with patience and honesty and the particular kind of care that does not coddle but does not abandon. "Your jaw," Renjiro said quietly, "has been clenched since you walked through the gate." Outside, the mountain was doing what mountains do, simply remaining in the face of weather and season and the whole chaotic passage of human experience, immovable. It had been doing this since before the first dojo was built on its slopes, and it would continue doing it long after the last one had returned to Earth. The pine trees breathed in the evening air. Somewhere below, a river said its single, continuous word over stone. The young man's jaw, slowly, with the particular reluctance of someone letting go of something they don't yet understand they've been holding, unclenched, and Renjiro began. The demon in a man doesn't announce itself. It does not arrive with drama or fanfare or the obvious costume of something to be resisted. It arrives as a feeling that feels entirely reasonable, entirely justified, entirely like the most honest response to what the world has done. That is its genius. That is why it survives generation after generation, passed quietly from father to son, not through intention, but through proximity, absorbed from the air of households where anger was the native language of power. And that is why killing it is the work not of a single battle, not of a single revelation, but of 1,000 mornings in the cold before dawn, 1,000 moments in the gap between what happens and what you do about it, 1,000 small choices that no one will witness or applaud, but that accumulate over years into a man who is genuinely free. The teaching that Renjiro received and carried and gave away has always existed, refined over centuries by men who understood that the interior war is the only war that matters, that every external battle is decided first and, most importantly, by what happens in the silence before the blade is drawn. It lives wherever men are willing to sit still long enough to find the gap, to notice what the anger actually is, to ask the question that changes everything. That teaching is alive today, gathered and given form at ancient wisdom tea, where what the old masters knew meets the lives that modern men are actually living. The warrior who cannot be provoked, cannot be defeated. Walk toward stillness. The dojo is open.